The Indiana Fever didn't sign Sophie Cunningham to fill a roster spot. They signed her with a purpose, and the moment you understand what that purpose actually is, the entire offseason narrative around this team changes completely. Because here's what most of the coverage keeps getting wrong. This is not a story about a shooter finding a new home. This is a story about a franchise making the most calculated personnel decision in their recent history. A decision built around one undeniable reality. Caitlin Clark is the most valuable player in women's basketball right now, and last season, the league made it uncomfortably clear that protecting her was not a priority for anyone except the fans watching it happen in real time. That calculation ends in 2026. Sophie Cunningham re-signed with the Indiana Fever, and the internet immediately started treating it like some feel-good loyalty story. Player comes back to the city she loves, big smiles, happy endings, move on. But peel back one layer, and you find something far more deliberate, far more strategic, and honestly far more revealing about where this franchise's head is at right now, and what they genuinely believe it takes to compete for a championship at the highest level. If you've been following this story closely, hit that like button right now. It tells us you're here for the real analysis, the kind that goes deeper than the headlines, and it helps us keep producing exactly this. Now let's rewind to last season, because if you want to understand why Sophie Cunningham's return matters so much, you have to sit with what Caitlin Clark was walking into on the floor every single night during her rookie year. This wasn't a standard adjustment period. This wasn't the routine roughing up that every young player goes through when they first enter a professional league. What happened to Caitlin Clark in 2025 had a specific character to it, a targeted, sustained physicality that became one of the dominant storylines of the entire season. Jack Sheldon came in with that physical energy from day one, establishing early that the approach to Clark was going to be aggressive and physical from the jump. Marina Mabrey wasn't holding back either, consistently getting into Clark's space with contact that drew debate across the entire basketball media landscape. And the incidents didn't stay contained to one or two players. There was a broader pattern, a rotating cast of defenders who came into games seemingly prepared to test Clark physically, to see whether she would back down, whether the referees would intervene, and whether her own teammates would respond. On that last question, whether her teammates would respond, the honest answer through most of that season was uncomfortable. Look, this isn't about attacking the 2025 Indiana Fever as a whole, but the perception that developed across that season, and perception in a league this tightly knit carries real weight, was that Caitlin Clark was too often left to manage the physical storm largely on her own. The on-court accountability that a team needs when its star is being tested was inconsistent at best, and by the end of the year, the physical toll, the contact, the targeting, the accumulated wear had become part of a real conversation about Clark's health going into the off-season. Here's where the Alyssa Smith situation becomes genuinely revealing. Smith held a specific roster spot that, in theory, should have provided veteran presence, toughness, and exactly the kind of teammate energy that protects your star. Instead, what unfolded in the second half of that season told a completely different story. After the All-Star break, Smith's performance and visible engagement dropped so significantly that it became impossible for analysts to ignore. The word accountability showed up repeatedly in connection with her second-half showing. She was on the court, she just wasn't showing up in any of the ways that matter, and then came the trade. The Indiana Fever moved Alyssa Smith to the Dallas Wings, and within minutes of that deal going official, not hours, minutes, Smith was on social media posting her excitement about heading to Dallas. No farewell message to Indiana, no acknowledgement of the fan base that had cheered her name in that building, no reflection on the opportunity the organization had given her, nothing. Just immediate pivot, immediate excitement, immediate Dallas content. You can interpret that reaction however you want, but it told you something about where Smith's investment level truly was, and in doing so it made the case for Sophie Cunningham stronger by contrast than any highlight reel ever could. Because Sophie Cunningham is not that. Long before this trade happened, long before she was ever in a Fever jersey, Sophie Cunningham was one of the most consistent, most vocal defenders of Caitlin Clark in the entire public WNBA conversation. When the commentary around Clark was getting genuinely hostile, when critics were piling on in ways that clearly had very little to do with basketball analysis, when certain corners of the sports media world were treating Clark's struggles as entertainment rather than a real story about a young player navigating something unprecedented, Sophie was standing 10 toes down, publicly, loudly, without flinching. She called Clark a gem. She talked openly about wanting to play alongside her. She pushed back against the narrative that the pressure Clark was under was somehow something she brought on herself. She acknowledged the weight Clark was carrying and made clear, without any ambiguity, that she was a fan, not just of Clark's game, but of what Clark represented for women's basketball at large. That vocal, consistent public support offered at a time when it wasn't necessarily the comfortable or popular position in certain pockets of the league's ecosystem is the foundation on which this new partnership is built. Sophie Cunningham didn't arrive in Indiana as a neutral party, as a roster piece who would need time to figure out where she stood. She arrived as someone who had already chosen her side, already shown her character in moments that mattered, and already signaled to anyone paying attention what kind of teammate she was going to be. So when the Fever front office made this move, they weren't taking a flyer on a shooter, they were investing in a value system, they were making a deliberate, conscious statement about what kind of culture they are building around Caitlin Clark. And that statement has implications that go well beyond this single transaction. The Indiana Fever, led by a front office that has been playing chess while the rest of the league was running the same tired free agency playbook, made a decision that prioritized character, physical accountability, and the kind of teammate presence that actually changes how opposing teams approach your star player on the floor. That is a franchise-level philosophy shift, and Sophie Cunningham is its most visible expression. Now let's talk about what she actually brings to the floor. Because the enforcer narrative, while accurate, undersells the full package, Sophie Cunningham can shoot the three. That is not a minor detail that matters tactically in a way that directly benefits Clark's game. When Clark is running the offense, spacing is everything. Every player on the perimeter who demands defensive attention creates more room for Clark to operate in the paint, more room for her pull-up game, more room for the kind of off-the-dribble creation that makes her so difficult to guard. Sophie's shooting ability means opposing defenses cannot simply ignore her and collapse toward Clark. They have to account for her. And that single tactical reality opens up lanes that weren't open last season. But pairing the shooting with the physical presence, that combination is what makes opposing coaching staffs genuinely nervous. Sophie runs through screens without hesitation. She communicates loudly and constantly, both on the court and off it. She gets in her opponent's space and stays there. She sets hard screens, fights for position, and operates with an edge that changes the emotional temperature of a game. She has spoken openly about her mentality. She is not here for moral victories, she is not here to play nice, and she is absolutely not here to watch anyone get comfortable taking liberties with the players she came to Indiana to play alongside. Drop a comment right now. Do you think Sophie Cunningham is the final piece this Fever roster needed heading into 2026, or is there still a gap somewhere that concerns you? Tell me what you see, because this community's reads on this league have been sharp all offseason, and I genuinely want to know where you're at. Here is the part of the Sophie Cunningham story that the surface-level takes are almost universally missing, and it's the part that matters most, if you're thinking about this not just as a single roster move, but as a shift in the entire dynamic of how the Indiana Fever compete. Consider what deterrence actually means in professional basketball. When a defender knows that approaching Caitlin Clark aggressively is going to result in an immediate, highly physical response from a teammate who is not going to wait for a referee's whistle, that changes the calculus before the game even tips off. The film sessions change, the defensive schemes change, the physical risk-benefit analysis for opposing players changes, and that shift, which happens in practice, facilities and film rooms and locker room conversations, invisible to the camera, is one of the most valuable things a player like Sophie Cunningham provides to a team like the Fever. Think about Jake Sheldon specifically. Last season, the kind of physical pressure Sheldon and others applied to Clark happened in a context where the response from Indiana was limited. The message sent, intentionally or not, was that Clark was available to be targeted and that the consequences would be manageable. Sophie Cunningham's presence in 2026 rewrites that message entirely. The second someone even considers applying that same pressure, there is now an enforcer on the floor who has made it abundantly clear that she is treating the protection of Caitlin Clark as a full-time professional responsibility. That is not recklessness, that is deterrence. And in a physical league where stars get targeted, deterrence is one of the most undervalued assets a roster can carry. Now, before we continue, if this level of analysis is why you keep coming back to this channel, the kind that actually digs into what these roster moves mean beneath the surface, consider joining as a member. Your support is what makes it possible for us to keep going this deep into the stories that the rest of the league's coverage glosses right over. Let's zoom out from Sophie specifically and look at the full architecture the Fever have assembled heading into 2026. Because this is where the front office's vision becomes genuinely impressive and genuinely underappreciated in most of the mainstream conversation. Kelsey Mitchell is back, and Mitchell's return doesn't get nearly the credit it deserves in this analysis. She is one of the most dynamic guards in the WNBA, a player who demands defensive attention on her own terms and who benefits enormously from the spacing and playmaking that Clark provides. Their chemistry from last season represents real competitive capital. That kind of two-guard synergy, built over a full year of playing alongside each other at the professional level, is not something you can replicate quickly. The Fever retained it, which was a non-trivial organizational decision. Then there's Natasha Howard. The decision to bring Howard into this environment signaled something unmistakable about the franchise's ambitions. They are not building for next year or the year after. They are building for now. Howard brings size, interior toughness, and a championship mentality shaped by multiple deep WNBA playoff runs with different organizations. She understands what winning looks like at the highest level of this sport, and she understands what it takes to hold it together when a series gets physical and the margin for error disappears. That institutional knowledge is not a small thing to add to a roster that is still finding its championship identity. Stack Sophie Cunningham on top of Mitchell and Howard, and you see the architecture clearly for the first time. Clark as the engine, the point guard whose shooting range, court vision, and playmaking ability is generating the kind of statistical conversation that simply didn't exist in the WNBA before she arrived. Mitchell as the secondary offensive engine, pulling defensive pressure away and creating in her own right. Howard as the interior anchor who changes the defensive matchup picture, and Sophie as the physical enforcer who sets the tone, protects the star, and makes sure the Fever's competitive identity is felt from the opening minutes of every game they play. This is not a collection of players, this is a roster built with intention. If you want to stay locked into every development as this Indiana Fever team comes together, every roster decision, every storyline, every angle, the mainstream coverage is missing. Make sure you're subscribed and have that notification bell on. We're tracking this story all the way to the finals. Here is the angle that is almost entirely absent from this conversation, and it might be the most important one. What does Sophie Cunningham's arrival mean for Caitlin Clark's actual production on the floor? Clark's rookie season numbers were remarkable given the circumstances, the physical targeting, the professional learning curve, the weight of carrying a franchise while the entire sports media world watched every possession. She produced at a high level despite all of it. Now think about what she produces when the equation changes. When the physical deterrence is in place, when the spacing is improved, when she has a teammate who has her back, not just in the locker room but on the floor in real time. Elite players routinely elevate when the conditions around them stabilize. Clark has already demonstrated she makes her teammates better. That's been documented thoroughly. The reverse is equally true and equally powerful. The right teammates, the right culture, the right physical environment can unlock a version of a player that hasn't been seen yet. And Clark, entering her second professional season with a full off-season of development, full training camp continuity, with a roster she trusts, and the legitimate belief that her team is built to win, that version of Caitlin Clark could be something this league hasn't fully processed yet. Multiple analysts who cover this league closely have begun, cautiously, to put MVP-level production on the table as a realistic outcome for Clark in 2026. The conditions are aligning, the supporting cast is in place, the physical protection is in place. The front office has made its priorities unmistakably clear, and Clark herself arrives as a second-year player with a completely different foundation beneath her than she had walking into her rookie season. The championship conversation around Indiana is not a content angle anymore. It is a genuine basketball argument supported by the moves this organization has made. The Fever have the star. They have the supporting pieces. They have the physical identity. They have the organizational clarity. And they have Sophie Cunningham. Someone who decided long before she was a Fever player that she was Caitlin Clark's person, now locked in and officially on the clock. The rest of the league has been put on notice. Sophie made that clear the moment she signed. And anyone who tries to approach the Indiana Fever's star player in 2026 the way Jock Sheldon, Marina Mabrey, and others approached her in 2025 is going to find out very quickly that the Fever of 2026 are built completely differently. If this breakdown gave you a new way of seeing what Indiana is assembling, subscribe and hit that notification bell. We cover this league at a depth you simply are not getting anywhere else. Up next, we're going deep on which WNBA teams are actually equipped to challenge this new-look Fever lineup heading into the season, and the answer is going to challenge some assumptions you're probably carrying right now. You don't want to miss that one. The 2026 Indiana Fever are not a redemption story, they are a statement. And Sophie Cunningham is the clearest, loudest, most physical sentence in that statement.